Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today, I think we have one of the most interesting conversations, the most important conversations we've ever had on the podcast. We're going to be talking about customer centricity. And not just because all of us say we're customer first, we're customer focused. Of course we are. It's about walking the walk, talking the talk, right? But what do we do? How do we operationalize the voice of the customer as a strategy? And we have on Michelle Urdiales. And if I didn't say that right, please, when I turn it over to you, correct me. But you are the CMO of Latin America for Maersk. And you also spent 5 years as inside of Amazon. And I'd love to have you explain your role there. Your role today is very much you have a seat at the table, the leadership team, the executive team that is making decisions that go far beyond marketing. And that's why we bring C-suite executives on here. Just because CMO is in your title, it doesn't mean that you are restricted to the function of marketing, right? You are in charge of the overall success of the business and whatever that means. And that's the priority that we wanted to talk about here today. And how do we literally operationalize customer centricity? And so what I'd love to do is just ask you to maybe explain a little bit more about your background before we dig in.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I started my career back in the 90s, mostly on high-tech companies, global companies working for 3Com, iOmega, VeriSign, the .com and .nets, right, at the check marks for digital security certs, which was divested for Symantec, but also with AWS and now at Maersk, which is an integrator for logistics globally with presence in more than 130 countries. I'm based out of Latin America, covering Latin America, but driving the transformation for customers and leading marketing, but also driving those decisions inside of the regional leadership team as well. So a long story short, but lots of customer centricity along the way. And I made the move from technology and telecom into logistics and supply chain, but also to drive this digital transformation that it's super relevant to our customers here at Maersk.
Well, you speak so passionately about the voice of the customer. And I'd love to learn from you what you learned working at Amazon, right? Known as the most customer-centric organization, and you worked on the customer side and the commercial side as well. And so this is a B2B podcast, right, for companies that are in a ABM go-to-market focus. What we can learn, because the transformation, we talk about transformation, the expectations on the B2B side have been so influenced by the consumer side and primarily led by what we expect from Amazon these days, I would say. I'd love to ask you just to start with, they have what's called an empty chair policy at every meeting, virtual meeting, in-person meeting. Is that still alive? And what does that mean? And why is it important that we should even be talking about it here today?
So absolutely. I was at AWS, which is the cloud business of Amazon, right? So mainly working with B2B startups, developers, enterprise, digital native business, and government as well. So O&Ds and education and etc. So it's more mainly B2B. I was not in the B2C side. But it was true, of course. So it was an MBA. As I talk about customers, I bring this, it's ingrained in my profile. I truly believe that's the right thing to do. It was true in a sense that all decisions were made starting from the customer. So we used to say working backwards from the customer perspective. So thinking about all the investments, all the plans, all the strategies, we would ask, what is the benefit for the customer? So it was ingrained into the processes and in the way that we led all the decisions that we were taking and processes and everything across the marketing plans or outside of it was to please the customer, increase customer value. And this is something that we kept reiterating and learning from, which I bring to Maersk for the past 3 years that I have joined Maersk. So AWS was my previous experience. And now with Maersk, we're driving the same behavior and thinking on moving the gravity from the internal perspective from starting from the customer and thinking about how we can add more value and help them solve additional challenges and making their lives easier and better every day. So that's our focus now.
So, it's really interesting. I ask every C-suite executive comes onto the podcast before we get on this call, and I say, from your perspective, what are the two greatest challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth? Across all the C-suite executives, number one is internal alignment as a challenge. Number three is the balance between short and long term. Number two is the lack of deep understanding of the voice of the customer. And the C-suite executives talk about, Steve, that's the part that helps internal alignment, right? That the voice of the customer is our North Star. That's what aligns us. And the long term versus the short term, if we just stay focused on the needs of the customer, that solves all of our issues. And over our conversations, what I've gotten from you is that if we just stay focused on the need of the customer versus our own growth objectives and internal KPIs and things that we tend to think about every single day, right? How are we doing on this month's quota, this quarter? How's next quarter looking, right? Those are very internal focused. Those kinds of things, they solve themselves if we stay focused on the customer and what's right. And that was what I've been taking away from our conversations. Is that a good takeaway as we kind of get started in this? Your passion for the voice of the customer and understanding them. And I want to have your definition of what that is. But is that the number one thing we should be focused on above all else?
I think it's a combination. Of course, business literacy is super critical for you to be successful in everything that you do. But what I have seen in my experience is that many organizations talk about customer centricity. Who hasn't seen before a graphic with the customer at the center and all the functions represented with arrows pointing to the customer, but you don't really feel it. They don't leave it. So it cannot be just like a graph or a poster. It's something that it's ingrained in everything that you do with all the decisions, with the planning, with what you're solving for your customers, who you want to serve, what are their pain points, their aspirations, their expectations, their challenges. So it needs to be beyond the demographics and the firmographics. Of course, you need to know the name, the email, the vertical, the size of the company, but it's way beyond of that. And you cannot get that through surveys or Power BI or the data exclusively. You need to go broader. You need to be invested and interested in the success of your customers. So my preferred way to do that is through conferences, through customer calls or meetings. So I just had a customer meeting this week, and I intentionally make time to listen from them because you can hear things that you're going to be connecting the dots beyond the data. It's also important, but you're going to hear more things that are not going to be part of it. And then you create this entire plan to please your customer and to address their needs, being through a product development, an enhancement in your service, or something else that you haven't thought about. Ideally, you would be able to innovate on their behalf, right? To think about what they need, even before they know that they need about what they need, right? So you know what's going on, and then you can come up with a solution and to surprise them. So I think it's all those elements that come together, and you can also represent your customers inside of a room and challenge the status quo and inform the organization because you have a data and quality information to inform the other peers. So you can work together towards the benefit of the customer. And then it creates the virtual circle, right? On the word of mouth and the brand that we care a lot about, but it's something that you normally do not discuss as, with the top management. You need to bring the data and the results, but the brand is not just the logo. The brand is all the customer experience and all the things that the customers are exposed while working with you. When they're talking to us, we are the company. So, how we are serving them, because customer feedback gives you direction. You are not flying blind when you have this data. It's not something that you think your customer is going to need or like or want, right? It's something that it's really informed. And that's what we need to be super focused, laser focused on the customer and keep reiterating the process because things might change. One happy customer today might have an issue tonight, and tomorrow, guess what? It's going to be something different. So you need to continue with this feedback loop on working for them and informing them and asking for more feedback. So it's a constant work. It takes a lot of work, but it's really rewarding, I can assure you.
So a number of things are going through my head that kind of validate what you're talking about here. McKinsey came out with a big study and they determined that those kinds of voice of the customer conversations that you're talking about, the data is super important. We learned so much. We have so much more data than we have. That's another problem. But the talking directly to customers, and they said that's the quickest path to ideas and innovations in our company. But they also said that less than 15% of companies actually execute well on a voice of the customer program. And most of the executives, the C-suite executives that I share that with say, Steve, I think that's probably too high.
Wow. I'm so glad it's not my case, but anyway.
But that's why I think it's so important, right, that we talk about this. And what I would do in your mind, I want to reframe this conversation towards why it's important, because ultimately we're judged on growth. Ultimately, part of our board, and nobody's probably even asking the question, right? So how do we equate a customer centricity program, operationalize it? How can you help connect the dots for us to growth in the business that a board understands?
Right. So it's not one thing or another, it's both. Because think if the customer is not happy and do not stick around with you, you're not going to grow. So that's the thing. You need to keep bringing the voice of the customer and potentially drive the outcomes with the best as possible to create the best customers experiences and address the things that the customers are looking for, circle back with them to ensure that this is the case, right? Because sometimes you think it's, yeah, I have addressed, check the box, and you do not come back to the customer. So you need to continue to do this at the same time that you're driving value. So as I said, it's a virtual circle. You need to drive the results. You need your customers to stick around because the customer centricity creates retention, right? If you do not care about the customer and you're not paying attention, the price is super high because you're going to have a churn problem. And then you're going to need to drive, additional programs to bring additional customers that are not going to stick around if you don't solve for these problems. And it's also very concerning, right? So it's a way that you're going to be balancing at the same time that you're driving growth. The growth is just going to happen if you have the customers that are happy working with you. You're helping them to succeed and to be better on what they do day by day and helping them serving their customers better, right? They're making them being successful because they work with you. So that's the beauty. And then it just like happened because we keep bringing those customer cases. And by the way, it's one of the things that I think it's the most powerful as opposed to talking about a product or a solution or a service that you bring other happy customers to talk about it, right? So by working with you, you help them solve for something or latency or issue or scale better or save money, whatever it is that you're providing to your customer, it's much better for them to connect. And they see multiple cases from multiple verticals and sizes on how they can relate with those customers. And then you're just like, you're there as a consultant to support them to be successful and not just like concerned about a short-term sell, closing a business right now. You're thinking about a long-term growth with them. It's a long-term partnership. There are going to be transactional customers. Everybody have them, right? Most of the times you have people that come and go, but we want all of them to have great experiences with us, right? Always elevating the bar.
Oh, I love how you answered that question because the question was about how do we tie customer centricity to growth in the business? And you immediately started talking about existing customers and the issue around churn. So I seem to be citing a lot of studies today, but both McKinsey and Forrester have studies about, like I think Forrester said 73% of new annual revenue should be coming from existing customers. Yet we chase new logos like there's no tomorrow. We can never stop doing that. That's not the point here. The point here is that growth is tied dramatically first as a priority to our existing customer base. So when you talk about customer centricity and where it can be applied to growth, I love how you went to that. And reducing customer churn and taking happy clients and taking their sentiments and sharing it with the new business pipeline and others that are considering us. In fact, there was a woman on, 3-time B2B CMO, and she said, Steve, it just always works better. Everything we do, when the voice of the customer precedes ours, they're the trusted peers. We're the sellers. And you got to go no farther than like the latest LinkedIn Edelman Trust Barometer to see that we are way down the list in terms of trusted. It doesn't mean that we can't have significant conversations. That's not the point. The point is they trust their peers way up here. And that's always going to be the case, right? And that's why they're waiting longer and longer to want to even talk to us in the B2B cycle, right? It's because they're doing their own work and they're validating from their trusted sources. So the more that we can put their peers, the voice of our customers, in front of them about the experiences and the value that they had, we're going to grow our existing customer base, but we're going to impact the new business process as well. And there can't be a better strategy doing that, right? But I want to talk about this because you talk about that internally to have that seat at the table. You also, and I asked earlier, is the number one thing, voice of the customer, you said, well, you got to have business acumen, right?
Yes.
To me about the business acumen and what you mean by that, because it's so important.
Yeah, for me, it's how you deeply understand the business that you're ingrained. And then, you can add much more value. So you need to understand what are the goals of the company. Of course, customer centricity is one of the pieces that you're going to bring into the equation, but you need to deeply understand how you can serve your customers. So where you can win, what are your strengths as a company, what you are trying to achieve together. And then you can bridge this with the customer needs in a way that you know exactly how to serve them better and how to navigate across the organization. So that's one piece. The other piece is that there are so many people, and I have seen in so many occasions, and taking marketing as an example of marketers trying to communicate with the stakeholders or executives, talking the marketing lingo. And sometimes it's not well perceived because they are talking EBIT and revenue and, what is the impact for the business, trying to make those decisions when you're talking about clicks or impressions or traffic. It's not that it's not important, but we need to have a common language that you're going to be tracking and, marching in the same direction, rally around the same goal with your peers, which is the organization. So you need to zoom out. So it's not your function. Sometimes you need to take unpopular decisions that it's not going to be beneficial for your function, but it's for the benefit of the entire organization. So that's what I mean. You need to think business first. And it's not for marketing, it's for HR, for CX, for legal, for finance, for everything. You need to think about, the common objective of the organization to be successful so you can collaborate and serve your customers better in the way that you know what's going on and what is the best that you can serve them.
Right. You better know, reflecting back what you just said, if I'm a CEO, I'm a CEO, CFO, and I'm on the executive committee and I'm with you when we're making strategic decisions about the growth of this business, what's important or not, I better know numbers like NRR, like net recurring revenue, and how what we're doing impacts the KPIs they track. They're not tracking cost per click. They're not tracking marketing attribution, right? It's not that they don't care about that. That's, I think, not your point. The point is that we spend a lot of time learning about our external customers, where we have very important internal customers, our compatriots on the executive committee, the other departments, so that when we're working with sales, and whether it's a brand new sales rep, it's the head of sales, it's the CRO, right? They have ways that they look at the business, things that are important to them. right? And we need to be able to speak their language and translate. So here's my question is a lot of CMOs come on to this podcast and I talk to them and they have an inferiority complex. They feel like they don't have a seat at the table. They feel like they have imposter syndrome. They feel like they're as good as their last set of leads that they sent into the company. And what you're talking about is a very different CMO relationship with the growth of that business and integrally involved with the other departments, the C suite, the board, and how we're planning for growth. And I think that's something just to be underscored. Like, do you feel like you have a seat at the table? And I know what your answer is going to be the basic answer, but how tell us as other CMOs and CROs too, right? Anybody, how do we get a seat at that table and how do we keep it?
Yeah, so that's the root cause, right? If you're not talking the language of the business and they don't see how this connects to what we're trying to achieve as an organization, it's going to be super hard. So that's why I recommend that you, of course, you need to continue to drive the things that are meaningful to your function, but you need to bring the impact. And I have seen many times from multiple organizations and big CMOs saying marketing does not sell. So what are you doing? Right. So we do sell.
Oh,
It's a combination of work. We do it together. So we're not going to be reporting to revenue because we do not close the sales. So, but we wanted to measure together. It's not me or you. It's something that it's in collaboration. So the benefit is to see the deals that are closing because it's also going to inform your strategies. And, what made that deal close? What were the interactions of these customers with the things that we're providing? What was the feedback that can also serve other customers, or even to your point on the Pareto message that you're given on the 80% that we have in terms of accounts, how we can cross sell and upsell and to really be meaningful to these customers? What is the next purchase? Oh, the propensity to buy, right? So you can accelerate that customer to make their life better. So I think it's a combination of things. So if you're not talking that language, you can also jeopardize even the function because we don't know if it's having the results that are expected. So it's really hard to debate for more investments. So you can drive your products forward and you can continue investing, reinvesting in the business. That's why we need to think as a business person. So it's not a given. You need to earn that seat, right? And by the time that you bring all those elements, and there's nothing wrong in educating the stakeholders, you can have those talks, right? So this is how it works. But when we come to a business conversation, we need to be ingrained into know your business inside and out, the numbers, the gaps, where you can also see, oh, I can support here. I can do a difference here with an additional campaign, activation, ABM, whatever your tactic might be. But the importance is really to how you connect the dots to raise the bar and take it to the next level. So I think that's where the misconception comes. And I know people try to protect, but I think it's something that we need to start thinking about collaboration effort as an organization and not in silos.
absolutely. And I think the lesson for all of us here is so Gartner, Forrester, I think it was McKinsey or maybe Deloitte, but they have all made recommendations that B2B companies need to have the role of a chief customer officer filled. And most B2B companies don't have that as a C suite level. And they've recommended that the CMO take that mantle. Now, whether you're here as a CRO, I just interviewed a CRO a few weeks ago, and he said, Steve, the most important thing that we can do is have continual conversations with our customers. And then he leaned in and he said, Steve, this is a 4-time B2B CRO. He says, those aren't sales conversations. Those are non-sales conversations that we all need to be having. So whether you're the CEO, you're the CRO, you're the CMO, we all have to be focused on the customer in the way that you've been talking about. But here's my question to you. Who brings the voice of the customer together?
Everybody. It's the role of everybody. There's no owner of the customer centricity. If you think about the person that will pick up the phone or send a message or issue an invoice, everybody needs to think customer first. So from the top down, you need to walk the talk and give that message and create a culture that you keep bringing the voice of the customer all the time so people start to live and execute on it and they know what the expectations are because it's not just one department. Everybody needs to have this culture and celebrate the customer and be, the ambassador of the customer inside of the organization. I wouldn't put one person in charge of that at all.
I like the way that you frame that as it's got to be a culture, right? But the culture does have to get set. If it's not set by leadership, we will have a culture, but
Yeah,
a culture that is strategically formed so that we can serve our customers better and therefore grow as a business has to come from leadership, right?
absolutely.
So I love that. The thought here is if only 15% of companies are operationalizing or executing well on a voice of the customer program, then the natural question is why? And how do you get around? Like, how do you make sure that you mentioned that you had a conversation, right? Lots of CMOs and CROs come on. They're like, hey, I start up. And one of the first things I do is I call and I talk to customers, right? And it's a non-sales environment and I learn. And you might do 10, 15, 20 of those, but then you get busy, right? And then all of a sudden you find out you stopped doing it. And then you're like, oh, shoot, it's been 2 months since I talked to a customer. That's what typically happens. We get busy. How do we operationalize voice of the customer? Because it's this important. How do we make sure we're constantly talking to customers?
Yeah, be intentional. So you need to have a program. It needs to be programmatic and be in your calendar and something that you keep reiterating. So we have multiple surveys, which is not just the survey, but we have customer consoles. And for marketing, I think it's easier in a way that, of course, marketing needs to take care of the customer because we connect it to the market and we are the bridge, right, between the company and the customer together with other colleagues from sales, from other functions. But we are producing content and we are in contact with them. So, in a way that we gather feedback from the programs and we make it intentionally putting together these conferences when we ask their questions, we interview them, and we make it happen in a day by day as part of your calendar, as your operation, because this is going to be informing your next campaign, your next content, the way that you're going to be forming a panel, what they're interested on in terms of a trends, a map or report, what they want to hear about. I also lead customer comms. So what is really interested for them? So it's a two-way for me. We hear the customer and we feedback the internal organization on how we're going to be driving our plans and our strategies and everything. And at the same time, we inform the customers on the things that may impact them or they might be interested on their next step with us. So, and not just products, as I said. It's something interesting about the trends, the finances, the economy, the industry that they might be looking out for. It might impact their businesses for good or worse, right? For better or worse. So this is something that we keep doing the two-way door to support the customers and to bring their voice into the organization and always challenging. So asking the right questions and bringing the voice of the customer with broadcasts and stuff that we do with events and with our content as well. So it's something that it's ingrained in our day by day. And I think it's an opportunity for, of course, we can always do better. And we look every day, we think on how we wake up, as I told you, on how I can be better and raise the bar a little bit further up than what we have done in the last cycle. So, what we can do today to be better each one of the days, because, the world keeps evolving and they have options and there are lots of complexities, and we need to be watching out for them.
So every single answer you've given, I've been writing down notes. Thank you. I don't normally do that during a podcast, but our human brains are wired so much that we can only really retain two or three things at a time. The C-suite executives, the VP of sales, marketing, anyone who's listening to this podcast today, if there was one thing that you wanted to make sure that they took away from this entire podcast, what would that one thing be?
I would say never lose sight of the customer. So be close to the business and be close to the customer and make it intentional, right? So make a plan to have these conversations and to bring the voice of the customer and reiterate with what you're learning in your day by day activities. So it really needs to be intentional. So I keep repeating it because that's what I think it needs to be the takeaway from this, because it's going to drive all the personalization and to create things that are going to be meaningful to the customer. And it creates the virtual circle that we talked about for growth and for their benefit.
That's my one takeaway from your one takeaway is be intentional. Because if not, then we lose focus on it because we get busy, right? And we substitute familiarity with the customer, maybe what we learned a month ago or 2 months ago or last year at the conference we had. And we think you brought up earlier, you brought up that our ICP is constantly changing. So we have to be intentional about, I think you said, make this programmatic, which means we
Right.
can't let up on it. I got to say, there's going to be tons of questions from people coming in. Is it appropriate to
Absolutely.
give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could read
Absolutely.
questions?
My pleasure. Of course. Please do
Okay.
share.
Michelle, the mission of this podcast is to bring together different insights, different perspectives, different experiences on how we create success inside of our B2B companies from C-suite executives from all over the world. And if we can do that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. And I just want to say thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and kudos back to you, right? Because it's a very beautiful mission to make the world a better place.